says this: Jesus took with him Peter, James and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Wow, quite a story. And we've heard some of those words before, haven't we?
Yeah. So what I love about the New Testament journey, the way we're doing it, is that you get a sweep of a book, don't you? And you kind of... I always try to read a chapter of the Bible a day, but I didn't often stick with it, and kind of was in a very isolated way. Right, read this chapter, head would be in all kinds of places, read the next chapter. But what I love about what we're doing is we read the chapters, but then for us at least, and hopefully for you, at the end of the week we then try and capture the theme of these 5 chapters. And when we do this, we realise that exactly like you said, that phrase, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased," whom I love, this is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased, is a phrase that comes twice in the Gospel of Matthew with almost exactly the same wording. One is at Jesus' baptism, and one is here on the mountain. So there's a river and a mountain, but the voice from the cloud, or from the heavens, from the cloud, same thing, says the same thing. This, Jesus, is my son, whom I love, with him I'm well pleased, which is a quote from Isaiah about the servant who's been sent. And it's really fascinating, isn't it? Because what you could then do, and I just think it's helpful sometimes to do this, is sort of think, why?
Yeah.
Why does he say the same thing twice? Like, what's significant about that? And you could say that the first time he says it to Jesus, about Jesus, but with others to hear it. The second time, he really clearly says it to these 3? Peter, James and John, 3 disciples. So he says it to the 3 disciples. So there's maybe a difference in audience, but it's fascinating that God says what he always says. I love that.
Yeah, same message.
And what we see happens with Jesus is that he hears this voice at his baptism. The Spirit comes on him as a dove. There's this sense of, okay, now go do the stuff. And what we see him doing is all kinds of wonderful things that you kind of think, I'd love to be chapters 4 to chapter 17 with Jesus. Just it'd be the best thing ever.
Healings.
Oh, like, everywhere you go, he heals people. He like shoves it in the face of those Pharisees. He's just like everything. You're like, this is a dream come true.
Yeah. Party time.
4 to 17.
Yeah.
And this is the kingdom come in every way we'd imagine we'd want the kingdom come.
Yeah.
Then this same voice says pretty much the same thing, except if you notice, the Father, or the voice from the cloud, adds 3 words in English to the end of this same phrase.
Listen to him.
Listen to him. You're like, oh, so why?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why does he say that? And my little hypothesis is that because what Jesus is about to commence is something that's a bit harder, it's a bit less like, oh, this was what I always wanted. Because what we actually see Jesus doing now is a whole load of things that are really hard. He ministers, he says, you guys are a wicked and sinful generation. He gets people to pay taxes to Caesar. He says you've got to go and find the lost sheep. He talks at length about, love, serve. That's how you become great. Serve others. Forgive others. Forgive them 70 times 7. This is how you deal with discipline. This is what it is to not abuse women and to create a culture that doesn't do divorce. This is how you lay down your riches. This is how you die. And so chapters 16 to 27 is unlikely to be anybody's idea of the dream come true when the kingdom comes.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the initial, this is, you are my son whom I love, with you I'm well pleased, comes just before Jesus then has 40 days in the wilderness, doesn't it? Yeah. Just before he goes off for a time of testing. And what you're kind of suggesting is this almost comes before the disciples are going to have a time which will test them.
And I think what we see set up here is the two parallel streams of the Christian faith that are both the kingdom come.
Yeah.
They're both the kingdom come. And we need to like a rope, we need to run with both of these themes and understandings of the kingdom.
So just pull out what are the two themes?
So, I mean, one could be sort of what you would classically think of the charismatic Pentecostal understanding of the kingdom coming.
Okay.
So, you see the glory of God being made present. Miracles occur. People who had lifetimes of sickness and hardship are now made well. The pain's gone. There's deliverance from the demonic. There's incredible truth being laid out. Just this is how to live a good life. Blessed are those who do this, that, and the other. And there's incredible stuff. You're like, wow, this is what we love. And that's one strand. Yeah.
Pull a crowd, yeah.
The second strand, which we should also totally love, is maybe much more in line with what the conservative evangelicals or the Catholic tradition would have, which is sacrifice, of laying down your life so you can gain it, of being willing to forgive people who don't deserve to be forgiven, of willing to be hidden, to just love the marginalised and obscure, the children, the ones who don't get you anywhere.
Yeah,
they're not going to give you any glory. You're not going to get, and that's and what I think we see with Jesus is that those are both kingdom coming. And it makes me want to live that kind of life that embraces both of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's a brilliant example, which I think is really interesting. Jesus and Peter are talking, and they're saying, "Hey, you guys don't pay the temple tax." And Jesus is like, "Hey, Peter, go and catch a fish from the lake." And this is one of the coolest things that ever. I don't know anything that's ever happened to you, but it's never happened to me. But imagine that you're just sort of praying. And God's like, hey, go to this pond, stick your hand in, a fish will be there, grab the fish, open up the fish's mouth, and inside will be a coin.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I'd be like, okay, I'll go. And if I catch a fish, I'll be like, wow, that's amazing. If I open the mouth, and there's a coin inside, I'll be like, this is, I'm telling this story till the day I die. Yeah. Isn't that just amazing?
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, take that coin and give it to the oppressive leader who's abusing you and your people and holding you in captivity. I'd be like, this is my miracle coin.
Yeah.
I wanted to frame this and put it on my wall. I wanted to I wanted to use this for glory. I want to give this to you, even God, in offering. I want to use this as, you're telling me I give this to my oppressor.
Yeah.
And that is...
the two strands.
That's the two strands in one.
That's the two strands. So you get the miracle provision, the testimony, the one that preaches real good.
Amen.
That draws a crowd. And then you also get the kind of real grubby obedience to a law. Yeah. A fulfillment of a law, isn't it? Like...
So he doesn't take you... The miracle equips you to live in the midst of these circumstances.
Yeah.
And we live in a world... Jesus is totally clear. Just so you and I really get this. Jesus expects your life to be grubby. He expects your life to be... There's no promise of anything other than we continue to live with beastly rulers, like in an environment where there's compromise and pressure on us all the time. He never does anything other than say that's what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
But he also puts money in a fish and tells us where it is and we find it.
Yeah.
To equip us to live in the midst of that.
Yeah.
And we live, the key thing that I guess I'm trying to make there, which I've not made so far, is the thing that enables us to live in the midst of this is he gives us the power to live a sacrificial, service, compassionate, focused life towards others, particularly towards the others in the church.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, as humans, I think, and disciples, we're so often, we love to pull on one strand rather than the other. And you've kind of alluded to certain traditions, certain streams of the church will gravitate towards one and kind of shun the other. I mean, what are some, I mean, maybe not getting too specific, but if we only pull on one, where's some of the weaknesses that we get to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've tried to map this out a little bit, but there is a story, isn't there, of Jesus basically saying, imagine that you are a servant who owes your master thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And you can't pay.
Yeah.
And you come to your master and say, I can't pay, and you beg, and he says, all right, I'll write off your debt. That's a miracle moment. That's a miracle moment. And I think there's a rhythm of me realising this more and more in my life, but I've had this moment. And there's something just so beautiful and wonderful when you realise God really loves you. He's really forgiven you.
Yeah.
Like, all bets are off. You're free. Like, you're loved by the Lord. Everything's forgiven. You're clean. And then the warning from Jesus is, so are you then going to go and treat others likewise? And, you know, I don't really want to pick up particular moments, but I know I've been around people who have experienced wonderful things in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And what they use that as they use it to elevate themselves above the normal Christian. And they wouldn't go to a normal church because you guys aren't filled with this, you know, you guys aren't really filled with the Spirit. And they would look down on those who don't really get it. And they'd probably hold a bit of bitterness towards those who've mistreated them in the church. And Jesus is like, every experience you've had is by grace.
Yeah.
You've not deserved a single moment of the outpouring of the Spirit on your life that you've received. So how can you look at others and mistreat them as if they don't deserve to be around you, or they're going to pollute you somehow, or they don't live up?
Yeah.
Like, and Jesus is like, it's awful to be that. What you need to go and do is release the same generosity and grace to those. So that's what Jesus himself says is what happens.
Yeah, one strand, and then if we go too far on the other strand, and there's like zero expectation. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last time, didn't we?
Yeah.
With kind of a real materialism. You know, there's no expectation that a miracle might ever happen. Yeah. And that can lead to kind of dry drudgery, older brother, kind of toughing it out through obedience, and that doesn't really reflect the movement that Jesus has come to bring, does it?
No, it doesn't. And again, I think, you know, I can think of examples of when you don't think miracles are going to occur, you do what's sensible. And what I know from my life is that you then start to plan, you start to come up with sensible ways to do things, and you become very pragmatic. And your faith really becomes a pragmatic exercise where you kind of, you know, I'll earn this amount of money, and then I'll get this property, and then I'll have a child here, and then I'll do this, and you kind of, and I'll get that job then next, and I'll go on this holiday, and it kind of just becomes
disenchanted. That's the language we used for it last time, wasn't it?
And the whole thing is a miracle. That Jesus walked the earth is a miracle.
Yeah.
that he calls us is a miracle. Like, if we rule out that extraordinary revelation of Jesus, that he would bring healing, then it's very hard to continue to think he forgives you all your sins, that he speaks with you and tells you how to live and draws you into life.
Yeah.
It just feels like it all gets pushed off to some future event. And we want to hold both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Want to hold both.
And how does that feel? I mean, I'm kind of... Do you feel pulled in two directions? Do you feel stretched?
I mean, Paul talks, doesn't he, in 2 Corinthians about what does he say? We're confused,
yeah,
but not despairing.
Yeah,
we're perplexed, but not in dismay, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think there is one of the most helpful concepts is the tension that you should expect to feel. Yeah. Now, I can just relate to this. That I woke up on, what day was it? Sunday morning, and came to church and actually loved it as graduation service, prayed for a few people, saw the Spirit of God meet with them. You're like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And just really pleasing, like see people I like, interact with people, enjoy the preaching of the word and the worship and all that kind of stuff. And then that same day go home, and for totally honest, start to feel a bit rough. I'm still not feeling brilliant today physically, but you then start to look at things and you think, it takes a lot. Like, you give a lot. There's people who weren't there who I wanted to be there, and there's these. Now, what you can do is you can protect yourself by not really buying into the church family, by not really having expectations for people, by not really praying a prayer of risk or hoping that this person will really move on in their faith. And you protect yourself that way. But what you miss the extreme of the glory of, like, wow, I've been praying for this person over the summer. I ran into them. They seem like they're present in church. They seem like they're really meeting with the Lord. You miss that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do that for others and they're not there, and you're like, oh man, like, this is hurting. And so there's a tension.
Yeah.
Isn't there? There's a tension.
Yeah.
Where you want to have the opportunity to see this happen, but that also leaves you open to the possibility that will happen down there.
Yeah.
And that's much more the life of ministry than to try and just sort of operate somewhere in the middle where you're safe and everything's okay and you're not really.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we see in some of these chapters, and again, similar to the kind of 4 to 16, 17 to onwards, that divide that we've looked at, but the emotional life of the disciples was not one of equilibrium, was it? I mean, even in the passage that we read at the start, they were terrified. Yeah. We see elsewhere in these chapters, they get angry with each other. There's moments of absolute amazement. It's not stoicism, is it?
It's not, and I think that's so helpful just to recognise that, isn't it? I mean, I think one case study we could use, which is from Matthew 18, would be to talk about how you would deal with problems like sin in the church if you embraced both of these strands, or if you tried to operate on a kind of stoic, hey, let's be pragmatic here, let's choose the easiest option.
Yeah.
So just to frame this, what Jesus says in Matthew 18 is that when somebody sins against you in the church, you should do 3 things. One is you go to the person privately and you say, look, this is what I think's happened. It's private clarification. And you say, would you confess? And if they don't, you go away, you take it to stage 2. If they do, you say, hey, wow, amazing, like, let's deal with it. So nobody else needs to know about it. No gossip. No telling anybody else. But stage 2 would be, okay, the person didn't confess. They wouldn't acknowledge this was sin, but they've done the sin. So you go and get 1 or 2 others with you. Is it 2 or 3 others? You put 1 or 2 others, and so the 2 or 3 of you now go to this person and say, look, this was a serious deal. Do you know what you've done? Like, you've really hurt me. You've done this. And before these witnesses, you say, right, we need you to acknowledge this and to not do it and to confess. And if they do, then wonderful, that's dealt with. Nobody else needs to know. No gossip. We don't need to go around and say, oh, can you believe this person did? Or I can't believe that. Or I just need to share. Can you pray for me? There's none of that. Like, you just go deal with it. Third level if they don't confess, is you then, it says, they still don't refuse to repent, then you go to the church. And the church community will decide what to do. And then if you accept that, great, dealt with. If the person doesn't accept what the church community decides, treat them as a tax collector or sinner. So treat them, basically they're not a Christian.
Yeah.
Now, this is like strands, like you believe that God's going to move in this. God is going to... everything in me is going to be like, I don't want to tell Andy that he did this thing to me. I don't want to deal with that confrontation.
Yeah.
Let's just find an easy way out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of us, we've been in situations where I've seen this happen in a church. Somebody sinned against somebody else, and everyone just said, hey, let's just sweep it under the carpet and let's just find the easiest road through. And yeah, as a disciple of Jesus, you believe God can work with miracles, and I'm also willing to accept the fact that there's real serving, there's real forgiving, we have to deal with the real grubbiness of life here.
Yeah.
You follow this through. That's kind of... Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a fascinating little bit of teaching, because there's kind of assumptions baked in which illustrate some of what we're talking about. So, Jesus is very clear about the possibility of someone will wrong you. In the community, you will get wronged at some point, and we've seen it, haven't we? Just the way that we have the tendency to believe like, I will never be hurt in this community. It's just absolutely shocking. I can't get over the fact I was hurt, and it's an awful thing to be sinned against. It's an awful thing to hurt, and Jesus in no way minimising it, but he's just telling the truth. Like, this will happen. Then you get the wisdom of, okay, well, I've brought this up with this person and they've not really accepted it, so I'm going to take it to one or two others. At which point they can tell me, get over it. Yeah. It's no big deal. Yeah. It's you bring in the wisdom of somebody else. Yeah. You bring in the wisdom of others. But maybe they'll say, oh yeah, hold on a minute. Yeah, we need to sort this out. And the community aspect. So there's just like such this earthly, proverbs like wisdom for how to walk in the grubbiness of life, but still with the expectation like there can be restoration and forgiveness. And so many times on this New Testament journey I'm like, this is just the guideline for community flourishing, because we will, people will sin against one another. And where do you go with that? And our culture's struggling at the moment, isn't it? They've just got no path to reconciliation. Yeah.
So here's a little tip for you that if you're in a church community, our church community, another church community, if you're not getting one, and if you're in one, when that person hurts you, do not just go and look for a new church. Like that is the worst thing you can do in that moment. Yeah. Oh, I just need to find a new church because this person's hurt me or upset me. Yeah. Like, that is just not the thing. There are reasons to go and find another new church, but this isn't one of them. Yeah. What you do, Jesus has told you, if you're a disciple of Jesus, he's told you, go and speak to the person. Now that's really tough. Yeah. Nobody's denying how emotionally challenging that would be. Take 2 or 3 people who you trust with you if you need to. And, to go and bring it to the whole church is a massive thing. Yeah. So I think it's just worth trying to put a little bit of extra clarification in this, because we really want this to be helpful. The first thing that we want to say is this: this thing that Jesus is saying here, we assume he's not talking about criminal activity. So, for example, if the sin done to you or done to somebody you know it meets criminal criteria, some form of abuse or theft or whatever, you must also go to the police. Jesus isn't saying you don't go to the police. He's talking about how you manage it in community. And he's actually saying we have expectation these things are going to happen. So you go to the police. Now, sadly, like the abuse scandal in the Catholic Church, and that we're now seeing in the Southern Baptist Church in the USA that's coming out. All of that would have been avoided if those guys had just simply followed these guidelines. Like they'd gone to the person and said, this is what's been done. They'd taken 2 or 3 others and then said to the whole church, this is what's going on, and had gone to the police and dealt with it. It just would have dealt with the thing. So it assumes it's not criminal. If it's not a criminal act, which it could, adultery or, betrayal, gossip, stuff like that, then this is how you deal with it. The second thing is that this process assumes the person's not a leader. Should we talk about what we do if they are a leader?
Please do, yeah.
So if Andy has sinned against you, or I have, or you're a small group leader, or a leader in a church, then again, the New Testament is really clear. This is probably going to happen at some point in your life. And we want to be humble enough to say at some point in our lives, we will probably sin against people. Hopefully not in major ways. It's certainly not our intention, but that's the reality of life.
Yeah.
So in 1 Timothy, Paul says, don't listen to an accusation against an elder unless it's brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. I guess that's to stop the woman on the back row, or the guy on the back row who's like, I never liked this guy.
Yeah. Put the boot in. Yeah.
But if it is 2 or 3 people saying, do you know what? This was brought. They went and brought some others. They said, look, you're domineering. You're always kind of lusting over people, whatever it is. They come and they see that taking place, and they see the leader doesn't acknowledge the sin, doesn't confess, just says, who do you think you are accusing me, or anything like that. Then it says they should be in front of the whole church reprimanded. So you go get another leader from some other place, bring them in and reprimand the elder. Now this is why you should, can I say this? You shouldn't be part of an independent church.
Right.
Because who is there to come and reprimand your church leader if they are just the summit of the organisation? Like, you want to find a church that's part of a wider organisation, so there's an elder somewhere else who can be brought in to reprimand your leader when and if they sin. That's just the simplicity of church movements. So in the Vineyard, we are an independent Vineyard church, but we have overseers in our region, nationally. There's loads of elders who could be brought in to tick us off and tell us off. Yeah. The buck doesn't stop with us. And there's trustees and all that kind of stuff. But so the bar for how you deal with a leader, say a leader sinned, your small group leader, whatever, you would deal with it exactly the same way as Jesus says, one-on-one, then take some witnesses, and then in front of the whole church. But there's an extra dimension for a leader, which is that even if we're going to say, hey, Anne, say somebody else, just
Bob,
our church leader. We've seen that he's actually been handsy. He's been inappropriate with women, and that's a sin. Now he goes, yeah, you're right, I have, I'm really sorry. Now if they were just a member of the congregation, be like, okay, done, it's not criminal, we don't think in this instance, it's just inappropriate, it's a sin, it shouldn't have been done, deal with it. If they're a leader, you still have to bring that to the people they've been leading. Even if they confess, you still take it to the church. That's what Paul says in Timothy. And that is because of some really clear things. The first thing is that sin isn't just an act. Bob's handsiness isn't just an act by him. It's a release of like a power into the community. They as a leader are breathing out some of the power of sin into the people over them. It's like a bonfire. Like you light a bonfire and the smoke of their sin gets in the hair and the beard and the dresses and the outfits of the people they lead. Yeah. So when you see sin that way, it means that you think, well, we've now got to go and deal with the smoke that's in the hair and the beard and the things of these people. So we're going to tell them this isn't like. This isn't to punish Bob, this is to deal with the actual issue. Yeah. That makes sense? And so what we do, if you're a leader, we'd go and say to the people you've been leading, look, we acknowledge this is the sin, and we're rebuking this person, and we want to help us all now deal with the consequences of this sin.